In the vast sands of the eastern Sahara, there lies a story that bridges two worlds. It is the story of a king, remembered today as one of the Black Pharaohs. His name was Taharqa, ruler of the kingdom of Kush, and pharaoh of Egypt during the 25th dynasty, around the early 7th century BCE. This was a time when the Nile Valley was not simply a single land. To the north stretched Egypt, a civilization already ancient, its temples and pyramids bearing witness to over 2 millennia of dynastic rule. To the south lay Nubia, home to the Kushite kingdom, centered at Napata near the sacred mountain of Jebel Barkal. For centuries, these two lands had shared trade, culture, and at times, rivalry. By the 8th century BCE, the balance of power shifted. The kings of Kush, once regarded as Egypt's southern neighbors, now rose to power within Egypt itself. They established what historians call the Kushite dynasty, or the 25th dynasty of Egypt. Among these rulers, Taharqa stands out not only for his reign, but also for the dramatic circumstances of his life and death. He would be remembered not just as a king of two lands, but as a pharaoh whose burial, far from the Nile Delta, carried echoes of both Egyptian grandeur and Nubian tradition. To understand Taharqa's story, one must step back to the earlier kings of Kush. Around the year 750 BCE, a powerful Kushite ruler named Pa led an army northward into Egypt. Egypt, fragmented at this time, was divided into competing local dynasties. Pa, based in Napata, presented himself as a unifier, claiming the title of pharaoh after defeating rival kings in Lower Egypt. His successors would consolidate this rule. Shabaka, who reigned after Pa, fully integrated Egypt under Kushite leadership. The new dynasty sought not to erase Egyptian traditions, but to embody them, to become their rightful heirs. They built temples in the Egyptian style, revived ancient religious practices, and restored monuments that had fallen into neglect. By the time Taharqa ascended the throne in 690 BCE, the dynasty was firmly established. Taharqa was the son of Pa, and he brought with him both Nubian heritage and Egyptian legitimacy. He was crowned at Memphis, the old capital of Egypt, and was hailed in inscriptions as a protector of the gods. Taharqa's reign coincided with a changing world. To the east, the Assyrian Empire was rising to dominance in Mesopotamia, exerting influence across the Near East. Their expansionist ambitions would eventually bring them into conflict with Egypt. To the west, desert trade routes connected Africa with the Mediterranean. To the south, Kush itself remained both a homeland and a sacred refuge. Taharqa was not only a king of politics and war, but also of faith. Ancient texts describe him as a great builder, expanding the temples at Karnak and dedicating shrines to Amun at Jebel Barkal. He promoted a revival of religious devotion, linking himself to Egypt's divine traditions. Yet behind this piety, there were looming threats. The Assyrians, under kings such as Esarhaddon and Ashurbanipal, would soon challenge his rule, forcing the Black Pharaoh to defend Egypt against one of the most powerful armies of the ancient world. Taharqa's reign began with promise. Upon his coronation in 690 BCE, he was celebrated as both Egyptian pharaoh and Kushite king. He devoted much of his early reign to construction projects, which in ancient Egypt were expressions of divine kingship. At Karnak, he erected monumental columns. At Napata, he enriched the temples that tied Kush to its sacred past. These acts were not simply architectural, they were statements of legitimacy. But within a generation, the political climate changed. To the northeast, the Assyrian Empire had already subdued Babylon and expanded into the Levant. Egypt, under Kushite rule, became their next frontier. For Assyria, control over Egypt meant access to resources, prestige, and strategic dominance. In 701 BCE, even before Taharqa was pharaoh, the Kushite dynasty had encountered Assyrian forces. King Hezekiah of Judah, facing Assyrian invasion, called on Egypt for aid. Taharqa, then still a prince, is mentioned in biblical accounts as marching with an Egyptian force to support Judah. Though the battle's details remain uncertain, this early episode foreshadowed the larger conflicts to come. By 674 BCE, the Assyrian king Esarhaddon launched his first invasion of Egypt. Taharqa, commanding both Egyptian and Nubian troops, successfully repelled this campaign. Victory bolstered his prestige. For a moment, it seemed that the Nile Valley could withstand the great empire of the East. But in 671 BCE, Esarhaddon returned. This time, the Assyrian army advanced with overwhelming force. They captured Memphis, Egypt's northern capital. Taharqa retreated south, but was not defeated entirely. After Esarhaddon's death, Taharqa reclaimed Memphis, showing remarkable resilience. Still, the struggle continued. Esarhaddon's successor, Ashurbanipal, renewed the invasion. By 669 BCE, the Assyrians again pressed deep into Egypt. Taharqa resisted, retreating when necessary, regrouping when possible. The war was grueling, marked by shifting control over the delta cities. Ultimately, however, the Assyrians proved relentless. Taharqa, though valiant, could not permanently hold Egypt against them. By the final years of his reign, Assyrian garrisons controlled much of northern Egypt. Taharqa withdrew further south, holding to Thebes and eventually returning to his Kushite homeland at Napata. His final years were marked less by conquest than by consolidation. In Napata, he turned once more to religious devotion. Temples expanded, rituals revived, and the legacy of Kushite kingship reinforced. He died around 664 BCE, not in Memphis or Thebes, but in Nubia, his ancestral land. Here, far from the pyramids of Giza, Taharqa was buried in the royal cemetery of Nuri, across the Nile from Jebel Barkal. His tomb took the form of a pyramid, smaller than those of Old Kingdom Egypt, yet distinct in its Nubian style. The burial grounds at Nuri became the resting place for generations of Kushite rulers, blending Egyptian symbolism with local tradition. Thus ended the reign of Taharqa, the pharaoh who ruled both Egypt and Kush, who fought against the Assyrians, and who returned to his homeland for eternal rest beneath the desert sands. Historians have long debated the significance of Taharqa's reign. On one hand, his military campaigns against Assyria may appear as a series of defeats. Egypt was ultimately lost to the Kushite dynasty, and Assyrian influence expanded. Yet from another perspective, Taharqa's resilience stands out. For decades, he resisted one of the most powerful empires of the ancient world. His ability to hold Egypt for as long as he did testifies to both his leadership and the resources of the Nile Valley. Culturally, his reign represents a fascinating synthesis. The Kushite pharaohs were not foreign conquerors in the modern sense. They saw themselves as restorers of Egyptian tradition, bringing new energy to a land that had been politically fragmented. Taharqa's building projects and his devotion to Amun reveal a king deeply invested in continuity, even as he introduced Nubian elements into the royal identity. His burial at Nuri underscores this blend of traditions. The pyramid form echoed Egypt's ancient past, yet its scale and placement were distinctively Kushite. It symbolized both connection and independence, a reminder that while Taharqa ruled Egypt, his roots and his legacy remained firmly tied to Nubia. Through this lens, Taharqa's story is not solely one of military struggle, but also of cultural endurance. His reign bridges civilizations, and his memory endures in both Egyptian and Nubian histories. After Taharqa's death in 664 BCE, the political landscape shifted further. His successor, Tanutamani, briefly attempted to reclaim Egypt. For a short time, he advanced as far north as Memphis, reviving the hope of restoring full Kushite control. But the Assyrians responded swiftly. By 663 BCE, they sacked Thebes, plundering its temples and treasures. This marked the effective end of Kushite rule in Egypt, yet in Kush itself the dynasty endured. From their base at Napata and later at Meroe, the Kushite kings continued to rule for centuries. Their culture evolved, blending Egyptian forms with indigenous traditions, creating a unique civilization that thrived long after Egypt had fallen under successive foreign powers. For Egypt, the fall of the 25th dynasty paved the way for the 26th dynasty, often called the Sate period. These rulers, while native Egyptians, owed their rise in part to Assyrian favor. They restored a measure of independence, but remained under the shadow of larger empires. Taharqa's legacy thus stands at a crossroads. His reign marked both the height of Kushite influence over Egypt and the beginning of its retreat. Yet the cultural imprint of his dynasty was profound. In both Nubia and Egypt, the memory of the Black Pharaohs lingered, a reminder of a time when the balance of power flowed southward along the Nile. As the desert winds shifted over the centuries, the pyramids at Nuri remained. Though smaller than those at Giza, their pointed silhouettes still rise above the sands, marking the resting place of Taharqa and his successors. For travelers and archaeologists alike, these monuments tell of a dynasty that bridged Egypt and Kush, that ruled across frontiers, and that left behind a legacy both contested and enduring.